From the largest military aircraft in the world to its first overseas logistic base in Djibouti, China's military looks toward the future. What is the role of China's armed forces as Beijing continues to rise in global influence? Hello, I'm Arnold Naidu, and this is The Heat. Days before China's military celebrates its anniversary, China announced the largest seaplane in the world will join the fleet in the People's Liberation Army. The PLA has also recently unveiled the largest military aircraft in the world, the Y-20 plane, and continued construction on its first overseas supply port. CCTV's Tang Bo joins us now to tell us more about that. And Bo, China is almost a year into its planned military reforms aimed at strengthening the PLA. How are those going so far?
Well, indeed, it's been almost a year since China announced its first wave of military reforms in November last year. But not much detailed information about how everything goes has been released by the military, except a 5-year military development plan published in May, which indicates that China aims to complete the reforms by 2020. It is called the 13th 5-year military development plan, goes from 2016 to 2020, issued by the Central Military Commission. And the document says by 2020, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, will have finished mechanization of all forces and made important progress in incorporating information and computer technology. It says priorities include the strategic restructuring of different services, the development of weaponry logistics, IT facilities, combat training, and international military cooperation. And currently, China's participation in the Rim of the Pacific exercise this year has highlighted the priority of promoting international military cooperation. Anand.
Now, Bo, you mentioned those RIMPAC exercises. China is, of course, at those exercises in Hawaii right now. It also heads into the International Army Games and hosts the joint C-2016 naval drills. Why are these military exercises so important to China?
Well, as I just mentioned, that promoting international military cooperation has been listed as one of the priorities of China's military reforms. And experts say the military reforms aim to build a stronger military, but China does not want to create fear with its growing power, but instead maintain peace and stability. So reach a mutual understanding with other countries is very important, and joint military exercises, military cooperation or exchanges are promising ways to realize that, and they are helpful for keeping decision makers engaged in a frank atmosphere, which will greatly reduce the chance of direct conflicts. Anand.
Thanks, Bo. That's CCTV's Tang Bo reporting from Beijing. Here to give us an overview on China's military, Tang Jianshun joins us from Beijing. Jianshun served in the People's Liberation Army for 25 years and is now director of the Department of American Studies at the China Institute of International Studies. Thanks for joining us, sir.
Yeah, pleasure always.
Now, the Chinese military will be celebrating its 89th anniversary on August 1st. When you look back at the past 89 years, what do you see as China's major military accomplishments?
First, I should say the military actually was established by the Communist Party in China, and since the very beginning, under the control of the CPC, and even today, I think the Communist Party still controls the military. This is actually a basic principle laid by the first generation of Chinese leaders, and after the founding of the PRC, I think the PRA contributed greatly in the construction of the so-called socialism in the country, and also in the years after the founding of PRC, PRA actually was involved at least 3 large-scale war, first in Korean Peninsula, and then with India, and then with Vietnamese in 1970s. So I think the PRA has been very important player in the social life of China, and also play a very important role in maintaining the peace and the stability in the region.
Now, the Chinese army is a large army, it's a modern army, and it's developing all the time. What is the focus of the military right now? What are its priorities?
If we look at the evolution of the PRA, I think we can divide it, the development of PRA, especially after its founding. First, during wartime, the PRA had no time to be modernized armed forces in the world. And after the founding, of course, the PRA suffered some so-called patience in the history of China, especially since they opened up and reform in 1980s, and only started from mid-1990s. The PRA actually has been on a fast development track, and we have witnessed the great achievement. And the focus today, I think, at least are 2 points. The first is to have a more streamlined, military structure from the commanding post to the basic, fighting hold. So this is actually a very important part of this round of our military reform. And the second is the equipment, and we have witnessed the fast development of PRA's platform. For example, the fighting ships, new aircraft, and also the most advanced equipment served in the PRA. And also the training of the officers and the soldiers is another important part of the military construction in China. And we have witnessed the intensified military trainings in recent years, especially after President Xi Jinping took office as the chairman of the CMC.
Now, you talk about the development of new aircraft as well as fighting ships. Let's look at one milestone, a recent milestone, when the military recently acquired its largest ever transport aircraft, the Y-20. It's been nicknamed the Chubby Girl because it's so large and it looks very big. And China has also invested in many naval vessels in recent years. We saw some of those vessels in action during those RIMPAC exercises in the Pacific. How will the country use those vessels? Does it enable China to extend its reach for humanitarian use around the world?
Yeah, I think this is a very important step for the decision makers in China to go abroad. Since our international interest has already been broadened in recent years to the outside world. Last year, our investment for the first time surpassed the investment in China. We invested abroad about $100 billion, and a lot of our Chinese pay the visits and also do their business nowadays every corner of the world. So this is a very important change for the decision maker to think about the protection of our national interest abroad. And the development of the military equipment, including you mentioned the aircraft, the fighting ships, actually is one part of the development. We are calling it a system of a system. This is actually a new momentum for the military development in the world. This is not one by one fighting against each other. We haven't seen such fighting in recent regional conflict in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. We haven't seen any one by one confrontation or competition of these fighting platforms. So this is actually a tendency for the international military development. So just following the international suit, actually in recent years, China has attached great importance to the system construction, which means not only have one fighter, but also China is going to have attacker and AVAC plans and oil and some other plans, so we can have a system and of a system.
Right. There was one other big advance for the Chinese military, and that is that it will soon have its first supply port overseas in the East African country of Djibouti. Construction on that began earlier this year. How does China hope to use that port to support its military missions around the world?
First, I should say this is not a military base. I don't think China would like to, construct military bases at the U.S. stars. And China only tries to find some logistic support. For example, since 2008, the PRA Navy sent their task forces to the area including Aden Bay and the Mediterranean Sea. This is only at the requirement of the United Nations. This is actually a UN assignment for the PRA Navy to escort the commercial ships in that region, protect them from the piracy there. So I think the logistic base or facilities required by the PRA, by the Chinese government, actually is only to give the support for logistic, and also the the rest of the sailors and officers after they get off from the ships.
Okay, sir. Thank you for joining us. We are going to take a break right now. Coming up, a look at China's push for more military cooperation and exchange programs. Plus, what's the latest on tensions in the South China Sea? We'll have the view from Beijing and Russia. That's next on The Heat. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the role of China's military as it continues to rise of global influence. Joining me for this part of the program from Beijing, Zhou Yue is the head of the anchor team for CCTV International and host of China 24. From California, Vasily Kashin is a senior researcher at the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Yue, let me start with you. We know that tensions have been rising between China and the United States over the South China Sea. Yet, despite these strains, China and the US continue to cooperate with each other militarily, as well as military exchanges between the two countries. Why does China put such a priority on this military cooperation as well as exchanges?
Let's talk about RIMPAC first. We know it started the RIMPAC Pacific Maritime Exercise in 2014, but this year is a little different. It happened after the ruling by the PCA in The Hague delivered a verdict on the South China Sea, which is overwhelmingly in favor of the Philippines and condemned by China. And after the ruling, the U.S. have sent 2 carrier groups to the South China Sea to assert itself in support for its ally. And China launched a large-scale live fire drill near the Xisha Paracel involving strategic bombers, guided missile destroyers, and submarines, all carrying anti-ship missiles with strong aerial denied intent, obviously. And interestingly, the USS John Stennis, one carrier which was still facing off with the Chinese several days ago, sailed back to Hawaii for RIMPAC. So did the Chinese Navy do this too? It sent 5 warships and 1,200 servicemen to join the RIMPAC exercise, although there was strong opposition inside the U.S. Senator John McCain even plainly said the U.S. should bar China from drill to show its disapproval of China's posturing. I think for both the U.S. and China, this kind of a joint maritime exercise is important in the sense that the armed forces of the nations can plan together to lay out their rules and make sure they operate from the same sheet of music for better cooperation and, even more importantly, for better knowledge of one another. To avoid miscalculation and misjudgment, the best way is to keep your line of communication open all the time.
Vasily, let's look at cooperation between the Chinese and Russian militaries. They have strengthened in recent years. Why are these two countries cooperating with each other more and more now?
Well, our cooperation started to expand rapidly since 2005, and since that time we have yearly large-scale exercises. And there have been a continuous progress. Exercises grew more complicated, more sophisticated every year. Since 2012, we have large-scale naval exercises. We have Chinese participation in various military competitions in Russia, like the best tank crew. the best airborne unit, etc. So we have serious progress in interoperability and very good understanding of each other's capabilities. It's like growing steadily over a long period of time. It has not started like in the last couple of years.
You talked a moment ago about the RIMPAC exercises which are taking place in the Pacific, and we see there China's military outreach by taking part in these exercises. Where else does China see more opportunities for international cooperation?
Of course, there are a lot of areas that China has been seeking out international cooperation. I want to talk one thing, that is the PLA's role in peacekeeping. China has actually met a strong demand in peacekeeping. In total, the United Nations has summoned 40,000 troops of peacekeepers, according to the summit in 2015. But since 2008, the number of major conflicts has tripled around the world. There are simply more troubles than troubleshooters. Then China stepped up its role in peacekeeping, sending police squad, building peacekeeping force, providing medical training and support to the crises areas. China is providing public goods to the world not simply because it can, but also because it should. With the world's second largest economy and a growing military force, China understands people around the world expect more from a growing power with more responsibilities. But of course, it is not without price. A Chinese peacekeeper died and 7 wounded in a terror attack in Mali. And just days ago, 2 Chinese soldiers died in peacekeeping missions in South Sudan. Casualties of peacekeepers are expected, but still painful. I think probably that's why the U.S. still prefers training foreign peacekeepers rather than sending its own soldiers.
Vasily, there have been concerns expressed about Chinese-Russian military cooperation. Last year, there was a report released here in the United States by the United States military, which said that China and Russia pose the largest military threat right now. How would you respond to something like that?
Well, of course, the relations between United States and Russia and United States and China are deteriorating rather rapidly in the recent years. But the cooperation started long before that. There are no signs that we are planning even for the future to operate together in a major conflict. However, there is growth of interoperability and possible preparation for possible joint counter-terrorism missions, disaster relief counter-piracy missions, etc., especially in the mutual areas of concern like Central Asia if something major happens. So it started long before our relations with the West started to deteriorate, and it will continue even if the relations with the United States improve.
And how would you respond to something like that when you hear that, China poses the largest military threat? As you've just pointed out, the Chinese military, to a large extent, have been involved in humanitarian missions. Right now, there are medical vessels in the Caribbean and in South America providing services to people in that part of the world. And of course, there's all the peacekeeping missions that you've talked about as well. Yet, the United States says it poses a threat to security.
I don't think so. I think it's the other way around. China and Russia do not pose a threat to the West. The other way around is China and Russia feel increasing threat at its doorsteps because of the West. For Russia, that is, of course, NATO expansion. The fault line is in Ukraine. And for China, that is, of course, in the South China Sea. The increasing alliance between U.S. and those countries surrounding China. After the Cold War, the United States is the only remaining superpower. All the other countries of major military powers are not even close to the U.S. capabilities. So I think it is very natural and inevitable for China and Russia to cozy up.
Vasily, Russia and Kazakhstan are holding the International Army Games this year. and China is hosting the joint Sea 2016 drills. That's also later this year. Russia will be there, of course. Why is this relationship one that both countries prioritize?
Well, we are very much interested in expanding this relationship because the roles of our armed forces are evolving. For example, China is interested in a greater number of naval exchanges because China is building a major blue water navy which will be capable of presence all around the world, and we also are interested in exchanges with the Chinese forces which have their specific experience and new equipment that allows us to operate better in a situation of crisis, and this cooperation will deepen and expand. It's expanding every year. It covers areas of it never covered before, like some technical support, logistical missions, medicine, transport, airstrike operations, reconnaissance, counterterrorism operations. We have a lot of small activities and exercises which are covering pretty much everything from counterterrorism to ballistic missile defense.
Yue, China continues its rise as a global power, and this question is more about its strategy. It's a little bit about politics. What role will the People's Liberation Army play globally as China continues to gain more influence in the international arena?
Let's talk about the history first. Actually, China fought at least 3 wars since 1950 against India and former Soviet Union in the 1960s and against Vietnam in the 1970s. And those were not full-blown wars, of course, but those were fought over territories. Since the 1970s, China had been single-mindedly focusing on economic development and have exhausted all the means to avoid conflicts. This was not easy in the first place because as a continental nation, China has the most neighbors on its borders, 20 to be exact, 14 on land and 16 on the sea. By the way, America has just 2 land neighbors. So with America's pivot to Asia policy, we might expect more confrontations between the 2 largest militaries in the Pacific, in the West Pacific. But I believe a shooting war between 2 nuclear major powers is simply unimaginable, if not impossible, because that basically means the end of the world as we know it. And before that happened, the world economy would already have collapsed.
Vasily, Russia and China recently signed some major arms deals. You've written about this. You said in a piece for the Carnegie Moscow Center that the 2 countries may be approaching a new, quote, golden age in arms exports and imports. Tell us about that.
Well, yes, we signed 2 major deals. One is S-400 SAM systems, another is Su-35 fighters, which will be delivered to China. Historically, the maximum volume of Russian arms exports to China was $2.7 billion per year. That was reached in early 2000s, in 2002. Before these deals, our export volume was in different years between $1.5 and $2 billion. With these new deals, we will probably get closer to the previous record levels. And there is also new area of cooperation. China is starting to export some of the defense technology to Russia. Since we have encountered Western sanctions, we cannot procure certain kinds of equipment in the West. There is already the first example, Chinese naval diesels for patrol ships and small missile ships. There are also new deals being discussed on exchange of our liquid fuel rocket engine technology to the Chinese space electronic components technology, which will also expand our cooperation. And possibly in the future, there will be new major areas of cooperations where the Chinese have their pockets of excellence. For example, that could be UAVs or some types of naval ship power plants. So we can be optimistic about the expansion, and we are also providing growing number of research and development services for the Chinese. We are being subcontracted a lot of research and development work for major Chinese projects in defense and dual technology areas.
Yue, one final question, and there's, what do you think is the greatest misperception in the West about the Chinese military and the role that it plays?
I think the greatest misconception is probably about the grand strategy of China's military. I recall Ronald Reagan, the President of the United States, once said, "We maintain peace through our strengths. Weakness only invites aggression." Well, the Americans believe in this, and the Chinese actually has been living by this. Not for 240 years, probably for 2,000 years. And this is the most important mantra that Chinese still believe in. And there is another set of beliefs that is also created 2,000 years, that is cited by Sun Tzu, that is, we don't have to subdue the enemy by using the force. You don't have to prove the use of your weapons by pulling the trigger. Sometimes posturing may be the better way. And I think this is what the Chinese has been doing. The Chinese has been deploying its capabilities in order to keep the opponents at some distance, not getting too close up, not to spread itself all over the world. I think when it step up against any militaries in the world, China will not be an easy pushover, but I also do not believe that China will overspend its military to become an aggressive power in any time soon.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. So, Yue, Vasily, Kashin, thanks to both of you for joining us. That's all we have time for, but the conversation continues online. Chat with us about this or any other show on Twitter. We're at CCTV_America. We also use Facebook. Find us at facebook.com/CCTV America. I'm Arnold Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.